Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Nice to see you today. Thanks so much for joining our session on partnerships today. We're very glad to have you. My name is Janet Heisey, and I am a co-author of the State of Economic Inclusion Report 2021, and I'm also a consultant at the Partnership for Economic Inclusion. And we're really glad to have you today. I just wanted to remind you, many of you have already done this before, but please be sure and click the globe at the bottom of your screen. Simultaneous interpretation is available in French, Spanish, English, and Arabic. So please choose your language there. This presentation will be in English. If you're having any connection issues or trouble connecting with the interpretation, please let us know in the chat box. And please also use that chat box to send us questions, send us your thoughts and experiences from your own experiences with partnerships. And be sure, if you have any information that you think might be relevant to the partnership topic, please share it with us via email at peimt@worldbank.org. We're trying to collate these documents and this information so we can share them more broadly after this session. So I'm delighted to be with you today and so happy to share the day with three fantastic panelists. I'd like to introduce them now. Makda Getachew manages the donor coordination team of the Rural Productive Safety Net Program, PSNP, in Ethiopia, and is a senior social protection specialist at the World Bank. Barbara Jackson is the vice president for programs at Trickle, and she oversees Trickle Up's operations in West Africa, Asia, and the Americas, and the Refugee Affairs Program. And Ghassan Kasabreh is the director of the NGO Development Center in West Bank and Gaza, where he has worked since November 2006, promoting good governance and sector transparency and accountability. So now you know who we are. Now we'd like to know a little bit about you and about your experiences with partnership. So according to the State of Economic Inclusion Report, 83% of all economic inclusion programs have 5 to 8 components. And in order to manage all of these components, partnership is absolutely critical. We need to partner in order to deliver these effectively. So you're going to see a Zoom poll pop up on your screen, and we ask you to vote for the following. For those of you that are supporting or planning economic inclusion programs, what are the top challenges that you face with partnership? And you can select up to 3 of those, please. Is it identifying suitable partners, establishing the right incentives to encourage partners to join, managing many partners across projects, staying aligned on objectives, coordination, accountability, or measuring performance and ensuring transparency? So please click your responses and let's see how things turn out. This partnership question is absolutely critical as we try and engage successfully to implement these programs that are so complex. So please go ahead and vote, and I will close the vote in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And can we see the results? Very good. So we have a couple of, we've got a pretty good array here across all of these different challenges, but the standouts are coordination and measuring performance and ensuring transparency. And I see that identifying suitable partners can also be a considerable challenge. So I think this is important. Coordination is definitely one of the themes that we're going to be talking about today. And we have some tools as well developed by some of our panelists to help us to sort of guide us as we're thinking about these strategies. So next up, I would like to share with you some observations from the State of Economic Inclusion Report. As you know, we surveyed different organizations about economic inclusion programs underway. 219 were identified, and 49% of those were government-led. Next slide, please. Not surprisingly, partnership is absolutely critical, as I mentioned, with all of this different coordination role that's so important. And we can see that there's a wide range of partnerships that governments what was interesting to me, not only is the diversity of different partnership options that we see on the left, but on the right, how many local community institutions are being engaged in this effort. So from village savings and loan associations and other groups to producer organizations, other organizations. These too are being mobilized by government, which is great, an effort to try and really drive down into the community level in order to deliver these services effectively. Next slide, please. So what we understand about scaling up programs is that at all levels, programmatic and institutional adaptations are absolutely critical, from deciding who delivers a savings component and what does it look like to the grant component. All of it requires those programmatic changes and adjustments. And institutionally, it's also critical to understand what kinds of trade-offs have to take place in order for programs to run successfully concurrently, and for this sort of sequenced approach to be able to run smoothly. So adaptation and scale up really draws a lot, or relies a lot, on political acceptability and does involve trade-offs. Now, in order to drive down, we felt this was a really critical part of the question of partnership. And in order to drive down, we developed 4 case studies, which you'll see here and you can have links to later. And these are 4 very different organizations that have engaged in partnership and that have scaled up these programs over the course of time, making a number of different adjustments. And these sort of reveal exactly what are the pathways to scale, what are the things that need to change, and the strategies that need to adjust in order for those different institutions to work well together. So what's exciting about today is, in addition to these 4 case studies, we're now going to hear from 3 different institutions that have worked very hard at different types of partnership and understanding how to get this right. So with that, let me introduce our first presentation from Barbara. Barbara, when many organizations think about going to scale with government partners, they think about scale at a national level, focusing on national level or state level partnerships or engagements. But in Guatemala, for the past 8 years, Trickle Up has partnered with municipal governments in order to deliver these economic inclusion programs to indigenous populations in Guatemala. So I wonder if you can share more with us about those programs.
Sure. Thank you, Janet. And thank you all for being here with us today and for the opportunity to share our experience of partnership at the municipality level in Guatemala. We really hope that this can be an enlightening for forging expanded partnerships of economic inclusion and for scaling these approaches in the future. Can we go to the next slide then, please? And then the next one. So why work with local governments? Why are they important? We have been present in Guatemala for 12 years. And as Janet said, we've been working intensively with government partners for the past 8 years. And we've discovered this to be very beneficial. National level engagement is extremely difficult in this context for a number of reasons, including lack of prioritization of poverty reduction processes. Within the government administrative system in Guatemala, municipalities actually hold a great deal of authority and autonomy and have the closest relationship and accountability to rural communities. The municipalities with whom we have partnered, now 10, are located in the north central and western highlands of Guatemala and are highly representative of the indigenous population, which makes up nearly half of the national population of Guatemala. And due to ethnicity, language, and culture, these populations have traditionally been the most marginalized, disadvantaged, and oppressed. In great part, the municipalities have taken on a policy commitment to economic inclusion and to establishing systems of mutual accountability. We think this is absolutely fundamental to partnerships. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. While this slide may look a little bit overwhelming, there you go. While this slide may look a little bit overwhelming in terms of the colors and the boxes, what it's really meant to depict is a different level of engagement from trickle up with local governments in a flow chart process with a primary focus on the community and program participants whom the graduation program is intended to reach. The process is cyclical and that it is adaptive to what our frequent government changes, some of the big challenges that we encounter in partnerships, or in some steps need to be repeated. The guiding basis for all of this are the agreements reached with the partner authorities, including identification of geographic and population targets utilizing poverty and vulnerability mapping criteria. Agreements made with the municipalities before initiation of programs include identification of key areas of cooperation with distinct government offices. We see those highlighted there, Women's Office, Planning Office, etc., as well as identifying key areas of technical support and assistance. The approach has to be flexible and responsive to the municipality needs and has resulted in some very important and sometimes unanticipated outcomes, such as the establishment of an Office of Persons with Disabilities to ensure that the economic inclusion program is actually meeting the needs of those individuals and their families. Next slide, please. The role of local partners in these partnerships. We consider our role to be the assurance of the provision of quality technical assistance in the key areas of the graduation components, including targeting, selection, establishment of VSLA groups, all the components of the graduation process. In addition, importantly, our role is also to conduct social research with the aim of identifying the applicability of new approaches and innovation. Our programming in Guatemala has delved deeply into the development of digital tools to allow for enhanced reach and more coaching support. And this has been particularly evident how useful it's been over the past year during COVID lockdown. There's highly increased demand and interest in digitalization of tools and approaches that we've seen worldwide. We've also tested the integration of reproductive health education and engagement of men and boys, discussed yesterday in the gender panel as a key issue for ensuring support and sustainability. And I think that's one of those areas of innovation that's proven to be very successful. As noted on the first day of this event and throughout the sessions repeatedly, it is so important to consider the generation of evidence of what is working and what's not working. We consider this to be a principal role of trickle up in this partnership and to ensure that the municipalities, our partners, have the information needed to establish best practices while also utilizing evidence on their behalf and on their own initiative to influence others for scaling up these approaches. Next slide, please. So why are these municipalities motivated? Why would they be interested? Well, for one thing, they're elected officials. They are accountable to their local populations. The graduation approach has demonstrated its efficacy of reaching those most marginalized and highly vulnerable with proven success in generating greater economic stability and resilience. We've heard a lot about this over the course of the last 2 days. So the return on investment has demonstrated greater economic sufficiency, engagement of women in productive activities, and increased savings through community level savings groups that have continued on past the life of the program. Plus, very importantly, increased agency for women. Targeting the highly vulnerable, including persons with disabilities, to ensure their inclusion in response to policy mandates of providing these types of programs, but in ways that can be implemented and integrated within overall social and economic inclusion programs. And given the highly climate disaster prone context of this area, the ability to generate more community level resilience is of significant importance. And it's really been demonstrated again over the last year with 2 major hurricanes in Guatemala. Next slide, please. A quick look at some of the key outcomes of these programs over time. Replication and scale. In one municipality, over the course of the 5 years, the number of savings groups has increased from 24 to 94, and they have established a formalized network of interchange and of public voice within the municipality. This has been done at the initiation of the groups themselves, with some support from Trickle Up and much more support from the local municipality. We've seen consistent increases in savings, diversification, asset acquisition, and food security, and women's decision-making in the household. I'd suggest that it would be important to do more assessment of longer-term sustainability beyond the continuation of the groups, a key question, again, raised in yesterday's sessions around sustainability. Secondly, it's really just important to note that during extensive lockdowns over the past year, the social cohesion formed through the group processes resulted in at least 95% of the groups continuing to meet and to save and support each other during these very difficult times. Next slide, please. And what have been the results? I think I've spoken to them a little bit previously, but I wanted to highlight a couple key areas. Successful continuation of programming, commitment from local mayors and municipal authorities, despite changes in leadership with outgoing mayors advocating with incoming mayors and new authorities for retention of staff, and at times increase in budgetary allocation for implementation of this program. This is pretty remarkable in an area where there's frequent electoral changes. Secondly, the influencing and adoption of the program by other municipalities and the demand generated for support. Finally, and very importantly, linkages established for community participants to other important government services, including health and education, and the building of local capacities, government capacities at a variety of levels. So thank you.
Wonderful, Barbara. Thank you so much. So much great information there to reflect on. One of the things I think is quite striking, as you noted, is this idea that these groups have sustained themselves over time. That this COVID-19, I think we'll hear across presentations, has provided an opportunity to see how well are these partnership systems working. And it seems that in Guatemala, those structures are sort of functioning. I'm also struck by the fact that you're focused on Indigenous populations. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how does the relationship between the government and the Indigenous populations work? And was it a trusting relationship? How did those relationships how were they managed from the outset?
I definitely say that it's evolved over time in terms of the development of the trust, and it's all around the accountability mechanisms. And certainly Trickle Up played a very large part in this, in identifying how accountability mechanisms could be established. Certainly with the demonstration of what investment was made by the local governments on programs that were reaching the Indigenous populations, and vice versa, what the commitments were in terms of what community groups made to enhance their support for extended family members as well as other community groups. And they now meet formally on a quarterly basis. So I'd say definitely it's an issue of trust over time, but it has to start with the beginning of agreed commitments.
Wonderful. And we have a question. This is a very long and involved question, I'm sure, but do you have there's a question from Peru. Do you have a couple of ideas for situations when there's a lack of technical expertise at the local and municipal level?
Yeah, no, thank you, Alejandra. I think that's a great question, and one that I think our team in Guatemala has not struggled with, but has taken into account in terms of how we assess what government capacities are and the areas of support that we can provide technical assistance on, including things like around basic budgeting, operational planning, and just time management, things like that are so important. We're not able to always do that, but we also work very hard to identify other opportunities for them to access services to support the building of local capacities. But I do think it is a question of having to do this over a longer period of time. It's not something you do in a year or two.
Very good. You've been at it for 8 years, so surely there have been rounds of learning, right?
But we've grown in those 8 years, right?
Right. Also,
8 years, so it's not just the intensive investment in one location.
Great. Thanks so much, Barbara.
Yes.
Let's turn now to Makda. Ethiopia's PSNP project is one of the earlier government-led interventions emerging in 2005. In the process of scaling up, the Ethiopian government has developed stronger and stronger partnership coordination methodologies and strategies. Can you tell us a little bit more about when these mechanisms emerged and what they look like?
Great, thank you so much, Janet, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. If I can have my slides up, Holly, and I can start. First, maybe perhaps let me start from sharing a little bit about the program. So next slide, please. Let's go to the, so this is, So the Rural Productive Safety Net Program, just as a bit of background, was started in 2005 in Ethiopia by the Ethiopian government. And the main idea was to prevent extreme effects of severe drought by providing people that are extremely poor or chronically food insecure with monthly transfers of food or cash. And it's quite a large program, one of the largest safety net programs in Africa, reaching about 400, more than 400 districts, but about almost 8 million people are reached. And the basics are monthly food or cash transfers. About 85% of the caseload engage in productive safety net programs, and they get transfers for 6 months of the year, while about 15% are very vulnerable, what we call permanent direct support clients that get unconditional cash transfers. And there's also some complementary livelihoods services as well. And starting also from last year and this year, there's more concerted effort also to link them to different social services. So we just launched the 5th phase of PSMP5 after 15 years of scaling up. And it's a large program with $2.38 billion, and 25% of the contributions come from government. So partnership is very, very important for this program because one, it's very large, very complex, but also contributes to multiple policy areas: disaster risk management, social protection, health, livelihoods, and then there are also multiple co-financers. Next slide, please. And I just also want to just a little bit highlight also the livelihoods component, which is a big component of the PSMP and growing year after year. And this component provides coordinated support to some PSMP clients, including support with group formation, with saving, with financial literacy, with some grants and business plan support, as well as some coaching. And this is also one of the components where partnership is very important. Next slide, Holly, please. Within PSMP, some of the partnership I'd like to highlight are, of course, the partnership between the development partners. There are 11 donors supporting this program, the partnership between the government and then the development partners, and the partnership between government and NGOs. There's, of course, partnership between government agencies, but I will not cover that in this presentation due to time. So if we go to the partnership amongst development partners, which is the next slide. So 11 donors fund this, both multilateral, bilateral, also big and small. Some fund directly to the government and some pool their resources to a trust fund. Some provide in kind. So as you could see, if there was no partnership, it could be quite fragmented. So, but the development partners have agreed to one PSMP plan, one budget, one joint MOU, one program implementation manual, and they have also agreed to utilize the World Bank financial management, procurement, and safeguarding requirements so that they don't bring their all their own requirements. And in 2005, also recognizing that there needs to be a framework to collaborate, a donor working group was set up. And this donor working group is chaired by one donor, which rotates every 6 months and speaks on behalf of all donors and manages the communication with government. And the impact of this arrangement has been that there is a balance between big and smaller donors. So you don't see unduly influence of one development partner, which is very good for a nationally owned program. There's also significant reduction of transaction costs for the government. It also means that the government is able to galvanize and to mobilize resources in one national program. But also the debates, the technical debates that are happening among donors mean that the issues are more developed, more understood, and they're evidence-based before they go to government, which are very useful. Next slide, please. So if these development partners coordinate among themselves, there needs to also be a mechanism that how they coordinate with the government. And a very interesting model is the setup of the donor coordination team. This is the team I manage. So this is a team of experts housed within the World Bank, but the cost is shared by all development partners. And we are responsible to providing support for all 11 donors, but also for government. So we are kind of the interface between government and donors. And we facilitate that both oversight, but also that policy dialogue. And also one thing also that we manage is to ensure that one donor comes and do their own reviews, have their own requirements. We have what we call joint review and implementation support missions that happen every 6 months, where all government partners, NGOs, and donors come together to assess, is the program performing? What are we learning? What can we learn? And this is an established mechanism. Next slide, please, Solly. And then the other thing I also want to highlight is partnership with NGOs as well. So as I mentioned, there are about 400 districts that are reached by PSMP in Ethiopia. And out of those, about 15% of them are served by NGOs. But even though the NGOs bring the resources and implement it, they use the same plan, budget, as the budget framework, as well as targeting mechanisms, and they also work with government and community structures. And understanding that this framework needs to be established further, in 2018, an NGO and Government of Ethiopia partnership platform was set up, and this includes all NGOs working on PSMP directly or indirectly, as well as government partners and donors, and it is really becoming a good opportunity to see what lessons are coming from the NGOs, but also to make sure that government and NGOs collaborate. So for example, a couple of years ago, the NGOs really brought forward the issue of indebtedness and how PSMP clients that are taking out loans may have this challenge, and the government took it up. And then just finally, the final slide is to demonstrate some of the examples of partnerships in economic inclusions in the PSMP, to see how these partnerships, particularly between government and NGOs, what kind of innovations it's bringing about in livelihoods and public works. And on the livelihoods, just to mention, there's now greater focus on the big push agenda, recognizing that the investment that was going on to the livelihoods component, it was not intense enough. The NGOs had tested some models about that has brought forward the big push concept in the 5th phase of PSMP5. Livelihood transfers, before there was only a focus on providing loans, and the NGOs tested the idea of also providing grants for the poorest, and this is also being integrated. Working with private microfinance institutes is also another one. The larger program was mostly working with parastatals, government-attached MFIs, and with the NGOs innovations, this is coming up. And then also working with community coaches to support development agents and government workers on the ground is also something that came up through the NGO collaboration. Also on the public works, the input of universities, research institutes, and NGOs is also improving the guidelines for public work implementation and watershed implementation. And also something we're very excited about is now where the program is piloting also community-based childcare centers by working with NGOs, with Child Fund, to see whether community-based childcare centers can be used for both public work clients, but also for the community. So I think a key lesson from the PSMP is how, kind of a very collaborative effort of different partners, but also having the framework to make sure that everybody participates, feels included, but also there's a framework to review those partnerships is providing results, both in terms of resources, but also results on the ground. Over to you, Janet.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Makda. Such an enormous amount of information to learn from. So many different sort of levels, strata of partnership, aren't there? And I appreciate the key example at the end, focusing on sort of what have these partnerships yielded? What are some of those changes that are coming about in the Ethiopia PSNP5? So that's exciting. So we have a couple of questions from the floor. There's a question around building solid partnerships with stakeholders. This is from Mustafa. Is there a specific criteria for developing successful partnerships? What does that look like? How does it work? And is there an example of successful partnerships with NGOs? And I link this a little bit to the discussion about accountability and how do these partnerships sort of develop in a strong way, and how are we building some of those mechanisms in?
Yeah, I think if we look at some of the success factors, maybe let me mention two things. One is, I think national ownership is very important. I think the leadership of the Ethiopian government to have a very strong message to say, development partners, donors, NGOs, you shouldn't just come up with your own programs and implement it in a maybe isolated manner. We have this flagship program, we have this vision, even when it was small. To pass that communication meant that development partners were both incentivized, but also felt interested to align to what was there. So I think the Ministry of Finance is very strong to make sure that the Paris and the Busan also principles are really adhered to. I think the second perhaps success factor is, of course, partners will be interested, but then how do you keep them accountable to those partnership principles? And especially when you have so many partners, it's important to pin down the principles in a sort of commitment. So for example, for the donors, we have a donor working group code of conduct that everybody signs into. We have a joint MOU that everybody signs into. It sounds bureaucratic, but it's very important when there's so many different interests, right? And then similarly with the NGOs also, the NGO platform that has an agreed terms of reference, an agreed kind of entry point for discussion and dialogue means that it's not always ad hoc and it's not always at the benevolence of one government official or one donor official to make sure that this happens.
Really important. And I think, as you say, it sounds bureaucratic, and yet we saw from the trickle up slide as well, those sorts of agreements, those sorts of structures and devices in order to get everybody in alignment are really critical, aren't they? Thank you so much, Makda.
Thank you.
I'll turn now to Ghassan. Ghassan, an unusual partnership arrangement has emerged in Gaza and West Bank with the World Bank and with NDC. And I know you're going to share your screen with us soon so you can start your partnership. Just wondering, especially given what we've heard from the other two, how this partnership strategy takes shape and what's NDC's role within this rather unique set of institutions. How is that shaped up?
Yeah, thank you, Janet. Good morning and good afternoon to everybody. And I'll be happy to present the Gaza Emergency Project as a model for partnership. I'm trying to share my screen.
And Holly can step in if you're struggling. Oh, looks like there's Holly. Good. So
Okay.
Ghassan, maybe you can ask her when to advance.
Okay, so you're running the slides. Okay, next one, please. Yeah, so this project is being implemented by NDC, the NGO Development Center, and NDC is an NGO by itself and has been a leading institution in the delivering of services and grant making to NGOs in Palestine, specifically to services that are complementary to those provided to the government, at the same time aligning with the government's strategic priorities. Our main programs are providing technical and financial support to NGOs, and lots of it has to do with capacity building. One of our main achievements is the Palestine NGO Code of Conduct to NGOs, and it has been adopted as the model code of conduct by the Arab League for NGOs in the Arab world. So NDC contributes to filling gaps in service provision and targets areas where the government faces challenges and delivering support and services. Next, please. I think this is an older version of the presentation, but that's all right. I'll try to give some context to the working environment and operating environment situation in Gaza and why this program started in Gaza. Gaza, the situation there is very hard, and people faced a lot of political instability, economic deprivation, very high unemployment rate and poverty rates. So this project and operation came to alleviate the dire situation young Gazans are facing while supporting more sustainable medium-term development goals. The project development objective target youth in Gaza with short-term income support and increased access to internet-enabled self-employment opportunities, and therefore has two main components: cash for work and internet-enabled self-employment e-work, and of course project management by NDC. The largest component of the project is the cash for work component, and it targets the unemployed youth in Gaza, providing them with employment opportunity and therefore some short-term income. The second component targets also unemployed youth in Gaza and helps them to become, to find jobs over the internet. So some training on freelancing skills and finding online job opportunities. Next slide, please. This program is being implemented in partnership with the Palestinian government. So an advisory committee has been established and has the role of providing oversight for project implementation. And the advisory committee facilitates linkages and coordination between NDC and the government agencies, and ensures alignment with the PA strategies, and endorses the lists of selected NGOs in the partnership with the NDC and eventually the final beneficiaries. The advisory committee has in its constituency representatives from the Ministry of Labor, Ministry of Social Development, Ministry of Finance and Planning, and the Palestinian Fund for Employment and Social Protection of Workers. Next slide, please. So these are like the main partners in the project: the World Bank, the advisory committee. NDC is responsible for the day-to-day management of the program, the selection of the partner NGOs, and managing the program with the partners, selecting the beneficiaries, and eventually achieving the outcomes of the project. 23 partner NGOs were selected on the fourth component, which is the cash for work, and 3 service providers for the e-work. And originally, the intention was to target 4,000 youth on the cash for work component. We ended up targeting more than 5,000 youth, and of those, about 73% females. Next slide, please. And on this partnership, we work very closely with the government agencies on the selection of beneficiaries, as we are targeting the unemployed. There is a lot of coordination with the Ministry of Labor to verify unemployment status of the applying youth. And there is a preferential access to youth coming from poor families, and to those who are on the waiting list, and to refugees, so those who are on the waiting list of UNRWA's job creation program. So there is a lot of cross-checking of data with the Ministry of Social Development and with UNRWA. Next slide, please. The project has resulted in several impacts. For CSOs, they were supported through the program and were able to operate on a higher human resource capacity. Were given the opportunity to have educated specialists support their work. Many of the selected youth from the cash for work component are youth that are educated but haven't had the chance to be employed before. And in some cases, it helped CSOs to remain open when there was funding shortages in Gaza. And we have example here of the Right to Live Society, who is an NGO in Gaza that supports children with disability and children with Down syndrome and autism. And without the financing from this project, they could have closed. On the direct beneficiaries, of course, it provided the immediate economic relief through the stipends that the youth received. It was an opportunity for unemployed youth to receive to be on the job and to practice their skills, and of course to develop relationships in the sector of their expertise. And I would end by a quote from one of the beneficiaries from the program. Noor is a woman, 27 years old, had a cash for work opportunity. And she says, the opportunity I got through the cash for work project helped me learn useful skills at personal and professional levels, and it opened doors for me I thought would never open. Now I can be a productive member of society and have a job a salary, a title, and a goal that any graduate dreams of. Thank you, and over to you, Janet.
Wonderful, Ghassan. Thank you so much. Such an interesting, again, a layered coordination strategy, working with a lot of partner organizations, a lot of NGOs. And what I think is interesting is not only the structure that you've created with the Palestinian Authority, but also I think you had in your presentation something around how this was tested during COVID-19 and how this structure really sort of held up. Can you talk a little bit about what occurred after COVID-19 and how that partnership structure sort of came into action?
Yes, of course, there was a lot of coordination. In any successful partnership, coordination is a main factor. And we had discussions with the World Bank. We also consider the bank as a main partner in this project. And of course, with the Palestinian government, the advisory committee, and with the implementing NGOs themselves. And we try to reach to some sort of arrangement where the NGOs will be able to continue the provision of their services. Now, health services, now this provided support to NGOs providing health and education services. Health services were very relevant during COVID. So in fact, they continued to provide, and some of them even expanded to provide services to other areas. Education projects had to be stopped for a while, but then were able to continue when the health situation allowed. For the e-work component, which is providing training to youth, training was conducted online, and many of the sessions were recorded. So youth who didn't have internet access at the time of providing the training were able to access the training sessions later. The same for the coaching sessions, they were provided online.
It's amazing, a pretty seamless transition at that point, right? E-work is obviously allows for that sort of facilitation. One of the things that I thought was quite interesting, both in your situation and in Trickle Up situation, is this reach to vulnerable populations as well. So you described how some of these CSOs, some of these civil society organizations were able to survive as a result of support provided by NDC. Can you talk a little bit about that, and what's the strategy behind how NDC selects those partner organizations?
Well, we've had a long partnership with NGOs, which is like more than 20 years long. And the way we select NGOs is that we established very clear selection criteria. This was, by the way, based on a call for proposals. So eligible NGOs had to apply. Many of them were partners in NDC programs previously, but those are not like long-lasting partnerships. Now, we know that this project provides intermediate support, for the short term to the youth. But the fact that we arrange these partnerships with NGOs, it allowed NGOs to provide services, which is a longer term impact of the project. And some of the NGOs were actually at the verge of closing with the financing provided from this project. They were able to continue with the provision of their services. Most of the beneficiaries of their programs come from the poorest and the most vulnerable groups that don't find these services elsewhere.
Interesting. I think we'll move into our group session, our little fireside chat here, in order to discuss a little bit further some of these issues that came up. I feel like from our poll, we just talked about identifying suitable partners, which a good portion of our pollees identified as one of the challenges that they face. And we've talked a little bit about some of the accountability and coordination mechanisms, right? So coordination was one of the big keys here, one of the big questions. I wonder if we can take a minute to, well, here's an initial question. In the question of identifying suitable partners, Ghassan mentioned the strategy that they're using. Do either of the other two of you have experience, or what's the strategy when you're identifying partners? Are there challenges in finding partners who are willing to go along with these, these partnership agreements and arrangements? And feel free to jump in. Makda, Barbara, do you have experiences along these lines?
I can just start us off. I do think there are challenges, and I actually think they're related to points that both Ghassan and Makda have raised in terms of partnership principles, in terms of agreements made beforehand. In terms of determining if the commitment is there and the interest is there from partner organizations from the get-go. And I do think it's also important to consider as you monitor program progress, where partners and individuals are not meeting their commitments, that there are actually, decisions that have to be made in terms of ensuring that you're making the investments in the right locations. But I would say, and I think our colleagues have highlighted this very importantly, there's the whole issue of partnership principles, equal power relationships, and commitments and accountability around them. Thanks.
Maybe to quickly just add, I think that learning, review, reflecting aspect is very important. I think, especially for very large programs like PSMP that are implemented across various regions with different requirements, it's very hard to determine scientifically at the get-go who will be the right partner to, for example, deliver a digital payment solution or to deliver a livelihoods program. So I think having a flexibility to adapt, and sometimes, of course, it means you have to wait for the second phase of the program, but also wherever possible, also making the processes competitive, as also Ghassan said, means that, you could have an unbiased selection, but also within government, sometimes also having a very good reflection on, even among government partners, who would be the right institution to do that would be useful. Yeah.
Just a note here as well that Ghassan and his mentioned that they've created code of conduct, and we put that link into the chat box. So do have a look at that, because I think I'm sure that's many rounds of revision there, many rounds of modifications as these processes are refined. This can't be an easy process, I'm sure. Any thoughts on incentives? They've been mentioned a couple of times, but I wonder if anybody has an example of what exactly, we can understand what a financial incentive would look like, but are there other kinds of incentives that you're utilizing in your program?
If I give it a start, Janet, it's always an opportunity for NGOs to receive this kind of financial and technical support. Financial flows are very much declining. And the fact that they will get a grant and a project to implement is by itself an incentive. And this also adds to their credibility as NGOs, because they have mandates and they have commitments towards their constituencies. And when they are able to implement, they are fulfilling their mandates, their strategies. So this is a main incentive, and often helps them to expand their outreach to other communities, to other beneficiaries. So NGOs are very much interested in such kinds of partnerships.
Maybe an incentive from the donor's perspective is, I think, making the dollar go further. I think, especially for relatively smaller donors, I think joining kind of a big flagship program like the one that we're managing means that, if you are going to do it separately, the results that you're going to get are much smaller. So I think the reputation, the communication to your citizens back home in Europe, wherever it is, it's much larger. And then maybe a second incentive would be using the platform, so nutrition partners or health partners or education partners, they would be interested to utilize an established platform that reaches 8 million people, that has presence everywhere, because if they use other channels to pass these kinds of messages or these kinds of services, the results might be weaker. So these are two incentives.
Yeah, and to follow on that, I think there's the real incentive of being able to access new training opportunities, new technical capacity building opportunities for both government partners as well as in a local community level. So building skills and expertise. I think what also is very important is what I see from the community side to be engaged in this is that what we've seen is the results around having greater voice, engagement, so really around agency, where you're really you're feeling the power that you can be in charge of your own lives in a much more proactive way. So building that agency and generating that across the community and seeing it actually work. So I think those incentives are a little bit less tangible, but certainly have a positive impact in our areas that other communities want to expand upon.
I think that incentive from the community level, that element is really important too. We often forget that, right? We focus so much on the partners, on the broader partnership, but really thinking about how are we ensuring that people are engaging. Sometimes they have relationships with partners that we're working with that are not necessarily as trustful, or people don't feel quite the confidence, and so that can be a really important role, can't it, to build up that mutual respect and trust to ensure that people are taking full advantage. I think that's a good point. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, we've had a couple of all of you have great examples of working in unique contexts, finding unique solutions and strategies for partnership options. Can you talk a little bit about if somebody were interested in a municipal partnership or a donor collaborative or other partnership, what kind of advice might you have for folks who are interested in utilizing your particular strategy of partnership if they're just getting started?
Yeah, maybe I think from kind of donors' perspective, I think aligning people at two levels would be very important. One is at technical level. I think having there are various technical people in various organizations, donor organizations, implementing organizations. So having buying into the bigger picture, buying into the technical approach and fleshing it out through technical committees or technical working groups is so important. And then there's also the higher level, right? The heads of agencies, the ambassadors, because those are the ones that either make decisions, but also they are the interface on policy dialogue. So I think maintaining collaboration and dialogue at both levels and making sure those two levels talk to each other. I think if you can start there, I think you can move together.
I'll add on to that. I think it's really engagement from the beginning in terms of determining shared objectives. Do you have those shared objectives? Are you trying to reach common goals? And if not, then that you're probably not off to a good start. So really investing some time in that. And doing so in a way, and I'm sorry to repeat this, but it's around the partnership principles of demonstrating equal power in as much as possible, so that you are coming together and adapting and revising in accordance with each other's mandates, and really trying to work together to achieve common goals. But so it does take a little that pretty much time investment from the beginning, but shared objectives, goals, and commitments about reaching them.
I would add, if time allows, just to Barbara, I agree that partnership is all about common goals that various stakeholders, are willing to achieve. So, and I think what a certain model has done in a country might not be exactly replicated elsewhere, but then it might be a good example to learn from and to try to capture the best practices. I think opening the dialogue even before starting the program itself, opening the dialogue with the partners themselves and receiving all the feedback openly, allowing the process to be participatory and taking the views of everybody, and trying to face challenges before they start, helps the program to smoothly go on, and probably to start publicly talking about the program even before partners are selected, to make them get prepared for a potential partnership coming up, and making them aware of what the program is all about. Engaging them throughout the process helps eventually a successful partnership.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Super interesting lessons here, one and all. Policy to practice, I think, is one of the key strategies here. Clear communication, obviously, but also structures and systems put in place agreements and lots of conversations about to align one another on these partnership questions. Panelists, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate these inputs and the conversation as well. Viewers and audience, thank you so much as well. We're going to move on to our next session, but first, please, you'll see a Zoom poll that's going to pop up. We'd love to have your reactions to this session. Please, if you can respond to how would you rate this session? These are anonymous polls, don't worry, from poor, number 1, to excellent, number 5. And I will use, question number 2, I will use the material and ideas from the session for my future work in this area. So thank you again, all of our panelists, and to those of you who are joining, who are joining in our audience.